Johnny, you're not dying.
Okay, where's Mir? We have a seat for our next Nechama on the front table.
Yeah, the kids.
Oh, I thought I saw her come in.
Yeah, no, that was the Chama.
You
That
got
was
me
the Chama.
I know, I thought I saw her walking with somebody in the back.
No.
Oh, you think my brother-in-law's both, eh?
Okay, Chana, let me know when you're ready. Agad Yom Tov, everyone. Welcome to the Boca Raton Synagogue, Yud Tes Kislev, Farbrengen. Thank you so much for joining us. This is still a little bit of the pregame because I see such a wonderful crowd here. Many people from Century Village, where my very own parents live in Wolverton C. The Katz is from Pittsburgh. And I want to thank my mother, with her encouragement and support, made this night possible. So I want to welcome, they just came down from Pittsburgh, as well as want to welcome my wife, Rivki's aunt, Tante Faye, who came all the way from Bal Harbor to be here by her brothers. Farbrengen, Rabbi Manis is Tante Faye's brother. She also has another brother, the baby in the family, and his name is Avram Fried. So it's a lovely family, and thank you so much for coming. We want to dedicate this song, which is going to be sung by our chazan, Cantor Ayaleb Horowitz, who recently moved down from Crown Heights to Boca, central Boca Chabad area, dedicating this song in honor of my mother and Tante Faye, a Yiddische Mama.
When you're the organizer, you get to be the DJ too. That's Ich will bei euch a Kasche fragen, sagt mir, wer es kennt, mit welcher Teiere vermegen, Mensch Gott alle Mann. Men kauft es nicht für keine Geld, das geht men nur umsonst. Und doch als men verliert es euch, viel Tränen men vergeht. Zweite kriegt men keine nicht, es hilft nicht kein Gewinn. Oh, wer es hat verloren, der weiß schon was ich mein. A Yiddische Mame, es geht nicht besser auf der Welt. A Yiddische Mame, oi wie bitter, wenn sie fällt. Wie schön und lichtig ist in Haus, wenn die Mama ist da. Wie treurig finster wird, wenn Gott nimmt ihr euch voll am Habo. In Wasser und Feuer wollt sie gelaufen vor ihr Kind. Nicht halten ihre Teier, ist doch gewiss der größte Sinn. Oh, wie glücklich und reich ist der Mensch, was hat, als a schöne Matone, geschenkt von Gott, nur ein altitschke Yiddische
Thank you, Ari Leib. For the next song, we're going to start with a very famous cantorial piece to sort of set the tone of this Farbrengen of this evening, V'hu Rachum.
Also a reminder for those that need to daven Ma'ariv.
Thank you so much. Before we start the official program, we want to dedicate this Farbrengen this evening, Li'ulu Nishmas, Mrs. Reza Volvovsky, mother of our very own Reb Moshe Volvovsky, who was nifter on Sunday. Our hearts and prayers go out to the entire Volvovsky family. I myself was sort of a ben bayis there when I was learning smicha in 770. So we wish them only besuras toivus and nachas from Reb Moshe and his family and the entire BRS community. We also want to dedicate this evening, was sponsored Li'ulu Nishmas, actually, Reb Shimon Alevi Reichik, a well-known Rav of the Chabad community in Los Angeles. And our hearts and prayers go out to his son, Reb Yossel Reichik, Shliach of the Rebbe in Chabad of West Boynton Beach. This honor and this dedication is for his memory. Before we hear a few words from Rabbi Goldberg, I have to say a year ago and change, my family and I moved down from Crown Heights to the Circle area. It's been a wonderful experience. This community has been unbelievable. Not only the programs and the community and the Shtibel Minyan, which is run by Alan Berger himself. And thank you so much, Alan and Yossi Rutman, for organizing tonight. And the prime rib, which is coming out in just a few minutes. Don't you worry, we have some wonderful food coming in the back. So I want to thank personally Rabbi Goldberg. We've developed a close relationship over the last year or so. Thank you, and thank you for your vision and broad view and incorporating events like this and Farbrengens like this. So before we hear from Rabbi Goldberg about the chaos and the controversy surrounding the arrest and liberation of the Alter Rebbe, we're going to ask Cantor Ayaleib to give us a Yehi Ratzon. And we should remember, although we're celebrating here tonight, our hearts are in Yerushalayim to be united with Mashiach and the Beis HaMikdash. Yehi Ratzon.
חלקנו בסויר וסחו ושם נעבודך ושם נעבודך ביריה 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 כי מהעולם וכשנים קודמוני כי מהעולם וכשנים Samigdosh b'meida b'yameinu v'sein chelkeinu v'soiras echad Sheyavoneh v'samigdosh b'meida b'yameinu v'sein chelkeinu v'soiras echad Sheyavoneh v'samigdosh b'meida b'yameinu v'sein chelkeinu v'soiras echad Sheyavoneh v'samigdosh b'meida Everybody, thank you.
You want to sit or stand, please?
Tell me. Sit.
Yes. Okay, we will begin now the official part of the program. We want to welcome all of our national and international viewers through collive.com. Welcome. Without further ado, the Marda Asra here and the Rav of the Boca Raton Synagogue, Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg.
Shkoyach Rabbi Yoni. First of all, a very, very big thank you to Rabbi Yoni for all of his work on behalf of this evening. Farbrengen, on behalf of our community, on behalf of Klal Yisrael, on behalf of the world, thank you for all that you do. I want to echo all the thanks that was offered. First of all, to acknowledge the presence of dear colleagues and friends, Rabbanim from throughout Boca and beyond. Special welcome to Rav Manas, to Rav Friedman. It's a schus to host you yet again here in our community. Soon it's a chazaka if we haven't hit it already. And the Mirza Shem will bring often together, but thank you for bringing your wisdom, your teachings, and your light to our community. And thank you to all of you. Thank you for being here. Big thank you to Alan Berger, Rabbi Aaron, who had the dream and a vision of a shtibel minyan at BRS long ago. And look what's happened. Baruch Hashem, it's a beautiful thing. Should only grow as all the minyanim throughout our greater community should only grow stronger. Dear friends, Chevra, I feel grossly inadequate to even be addressing you tonight. I'm a beginner, I'm a novice, I'm learning. It happens to be that I'm a general in Tzivos Hashem, you may not have heard. But I'm a novice, I'm a beginner. I've tried to learn Tanya several times, and Baruch Hashem, in my own little way. Now, yet again, I have the schus of learning, I would say learning with, but really being taught by Rav Tauger. And so I have no business speaking to you tonight on this Rosh Hashanah, on this Yontif. Already it's the Isru Chag of the Isru Chag of the Yontif. But I'm sure something yet happened on the 21st of Kislev that extended. I know the 20th, he went to the wrong house, and it was tougher than all the years in prison. Stam of the 21st, something else happened, so there'll always be a good reason to Farbrengen, and no reason at all is the best reason to Farbrengen. So it's good to be together for whatever reason, but I'm grossly inadequate. So Rabbi Yoni put me down on the schedule and on this flyer. He's a great marketer. Where'd he go? He went to go get the prime rib or whatever is ready in the back. That I was going to speak about chaos, confusion, and I told him, I don't have a death wish, I'm not a masochist. I'm going to come to a Yutes Kislev Farbrengen and talk about the controversy of the Gra and the Baal Shem and the beginning of Hasidus. I may be crazy, I'm not that crazy. So I don't want to talk to you about that controversy. I don't want to talk about the light the Baal Shem brought to the world. I will say this, there's an astounding fact that inspires me and moves me deeply, and I hope it'll wake every one of us here tonight. That the Baal Shem, the Heilige Baal Shem, was orphaned at a very young age. He was a small boy when he lost both his mother and father. And if anyone would have frozen the frame and said, this poor, impoverished, lonely, orphan boy will begin a movement that one day more than half of the Torah world associate and connect with, you would have bet all the money in the world the odds were against it. But what a message and what a lesson for every one of us. It doesn't matter who we are or where we come from. It doesn't matter the love or if we are orphaned at a young age. If we have a drive and we have passion, if we have a commitment and if we are devoted, we can transform and change the world. We could bring the Geula. We could be the source of that redemption. You don't have to be born into the greatest yichus. You don't have to have the most brilliant mind. You don't have to have the most loving parents. You don't have to have the most nurturing environment. The Baal Shem didn't have any of that at a young age. He had lost it all, and yet he grows and emerges to be the founder of a movement that today, statistically, without exaggeration, more than half of those who identify as Torah Jewry, and arguably, and that's going to be my argument tonight, all who identify of Torah Jewry are Talmidim and Chasidim of the Baal Shem today. It's not reflecting nicely. It's not like a good. I was thinking it would be a good. They're not missing it. Reb Choni, they're not missing anything. A big thank you to Reb Choni for all of his work tonight. And so it's an astounding fact about the Baal Shem, and of course there was resistance at first from the Gra, and we know, and if you don't know, you could listen. I once gave a talk trying to trace that history and trying to bring the details of both sides and what happened, but that is not what you talk about at a Yutes Kislev Farbrengen. Chaos, confusion, conflict are the exact opposites of what this is all about. Look around the diversity in this room, in this community, among Klal Yisrael, in this world. And that faithful Yutes Kislev in 1798, when the Rebbe was liberated and went free, and now instead of Hasidus being something that he kept close to the chest and saved for a few special disciples, he was ready to spread far and wide. He didn't do so for us to focus on our division. He didn't do so for us to talk about chaos, confusion, and conflict. He did it to bring us together, to bring us one step closer to the Mashiach and to the redemption. One step closer to a place and a time when all of our hearts will simply melt and mold and become one altogether. And so yes, there was a period of conflict and confusion, and there were charamim, and there were battles, and there were fights, but that's not the topic for tonight. I want to focus on exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. Because even within that period and even within that story, even at that time, the seedlings, the beginning of what would bring us together was already starting, and today the world is a different place than it was altogether then. Today you can find the Sichos Talmidei Baal Shem in the Beis Medrash of the Gra. You can even find the Sifrei HaGra in the Beit Medrash of the Hasidim. And we're living in an altogether different world in which those divisions, while still existing in some pockets and places, and while still some important differences that we shouldn't minimize or dismiss, but on the whole, have simply been erased. On the whole, we have been able to synthesize and integrate and incorporate in such a beautiful, magnificent way, which has to have been part of the original vision to begin with. You know, when this conflict was raging, and the Holy Baal HaTanya, Zchus Yagan Aleinu, went to visit the Gra to try to resolve the conflict, and he went with Rabbi Menachem Mendel, who exactly he went with. The Briskers of Soloveitchik had a tradition that the Kedushas Levi went with him, but the Gra refused to see him. And some versions of the story have him sneaking out the back door, some have him running out of the town altogether, but he refused to see them, and there are different traditions why. Some say he didn't want to waste his time because he knew he wouldn't be convinced. But that's not the Masorah of Rav Soloveitchik, of my base medrash, of our Rabbi Blumenthal, our base medrash, our Rebbeim. The Masorah of Rav Soloveitchik, of the Rav, from his father, from his grandfather, was that was not the reason why the Gra wouldn't host the Holy Baal HaTanya. The Gra refused to sit with the Alter Rebbe because he was afraid. He was afraid that if he would see his face and it would be in his presence, he would no longer be able to fight. That he would be so taken and he would be so convinced that he would be in the presence of such a magnetic personality, of such holy Kedusha and charisma, that he wouldn't be able to object, and he didn't want to find himself in that place. And so even the Gra at the very beginning of this conflict understood the holiness on the other side. He saw it in the Heilige Alter Rebbe. And I think the Alter Rebbe reciprocated. You know, when the Gra died on the 19th of Tishrei, 1797, it was Chol HaMoed Sukkos, and many Hasidim started to celebrate and sing and dance in the streets. This great opponent, this great enemy of their movement, the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Yo had passed away, but Shnei Zalman and the Alter Rebbe issued a public letter. He issued a public letter in which he defended the greatness of the Gaon, and he told them to absolutely stop those celebrations, that the world had lost a holy person. In fact, even as the fight raged, at one point the Alter Rebbe tried to argue the reason the Gaon doesn't understand our movement is because of how great he is, how detached he is from Amcha. He doesn't understand the way the rest of the world, the masses, live, and therefore he can't understand what we're trying to do. So his opposition doesn't come from a place of tumah, of darkness, of evil. It comes from a place of holiness. So in our tradition, the Gra understood to begin with the greatness of the Alter Rebbe. He didn't want to be with him because he knew he couldn't resist him. And the Alter Rebbe understood the greatness of the Gra. In fact, that's how he explained. He was a Yachid Bedoro. That's why he can't endorse a movement for the masses. And he defended his name even after he was nifter, even after he died. Even after he died. So the beginnings of the resolving of chaos, the beginnings of unity, of achdus, of synthesis, of integration, of a Klal Yisrael that was coming together already began. Already began at the very beginning of the controversy itself, but then it continued. And then it continued. Rabbi Soloveitchik told the story. You know, Rabbi Soloveitchik grew up a great scion of the Brisker world of Volozhin, a great master of Brisker Lumdus, ultimate of the aristocracy of a Litvisha family, knew Tanya Baal Peh. He knew Tanya by heart. Mori Varabi, my Rebbe Reshechter, who will be here this Shabbos, one of, if not one of the greatest Talmidim of the Rav, regularly quoted Tanya. Last time he was here, on Shavuos, he quoted Tanya. Where did that come to be? How did Rav Soloveitchik know Tanya Baal Peh? Why is it that he tried to teach? Why is it that he tried to teach the teachings of the Alter Rebbe to his Talmidim one summer in Boston? When they objected and they said, we just want the lumdus. And he publicly bemoaned that my students, my Talmidim, they only want what's in my head. They don't have an interest in what's in my heart. And he was so saddened by that. Because the Rav Soloveitchik grew up in Kislev. He grew up in Kislev, a town, a small city of Lubavitcher Hasidim. How did his father, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, come to be the Rav of a Chabad town, of a Chabad shtetl, a little village? When Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812, there was a big controversy among the Hasidim whether to support Napoleon or whether to oppose Napoleon. The Heilige Kedushas Levi, Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, supported Napoleon because the Russian czars were very oppressive to the Jews. Levi Yitzchak held that anything that would lessen the oppression, the torture, the torment of the Russian czars would be better would benefit the Jews, but on the other hand, the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, held the opposite. He felt very presciently, very prophetically, very brilliantly, if you fast forward to the challenges we have here in America today. He said, while physically it would be better for the Jews if Napoleon won, it'd be disastrous on a spiritual level. A victory of Napoleon would open the gates to assimilation that were engulfing and spreading, that were contagious throughout Western Europe. And so the Alter Rebbe opposed because he said physically we'd be less in danger, physically we'd be less threatened, but spiritually we'd be the target of annihilation. Because when we are physically safe, when we are invited and welcome to integrate, to assimilate, that is a much more dangerous prescription. And the Alter Rebbe seemingly won, because on Rosh Hashanah he got up earlier than Rabbi Levi Yitzchak to blow the shofar, the tradition has it. And because he got up earlier to blow the shofar that Rosh Hashanah, his view won the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe didn't just support the Tsar's government. In theory, he took concrete steps. And his Hasidim, the Chabad Hasidim, would spy for him. They checked the movements of the French army. And he had a chassid named Moshe Maishlich, who was fluent in languages, and he went behind French lines and would return to the Russian side, and he'd pass on the information that he got to the Alter Rebbe, who got it and made it available to the Russian intelligence. And the French knew of the activities of the Alter Rebbe, and so the French put a target on the Alter Rebbe's back. The word went out, they wanted to capture him, dead or alive. So you're the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, Shneur Zalman, they're out to get you. Very powerful. A very powerful force of the Russian army. Where do you go? How do you hide? How do you save yourself? So he went to the town of Kislev, a place to hide. And there in Kislev there was a Talmud of none other than the Vilna Gaon. Now if you're the Baal HaTanya, with what the Vilna Gaon had to say about Chassidus, and the Haramim, the excommunications that he placed, and the level of controversy and chaos and conflict that arose, to go to a house of a Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Yisrael Ashkenazi from Shklov, the author of the Pas HaShulchan, the first Rav of Kislev. And the Alter Rebbe went there to hide because he said he could trust him. And when the Russians came to the home of this Kalta Litvak, to the home of this Misnagid, and they said, is it true that you're hiding the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya of Chabad? He said, are you kidding me? Are you aware at all of the controversy? Do you think in a million years I, a disciple, a student of the Vilna Gaon, would hide the Alter Rebbe? It's a pretty compelling argument. Convinced the Russians who moved on. The Talmud of the Gra had saved the life of the Alter Rebbe. And so the tradition in Kislev, a Chabad town, was to always have a Rav, Mitalmidei HaGra, to always have a Rav from the family or students of the Vilna Gaon. And that's how Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, Rav Soloveitchik's father, became the Rav of Kislev. And the Rav recalled as a child growing up in Kislev, all of his fond memories of learning Tanya and exposure. The whole town was a Chabad town run by his brisker father as the Rav to continue this Hakaras Hatov of the Baal HaTanya for having been saved at that time. And so, Chevra, what I want to share with you tonight at this Farbrengen is not what divides us and not what spreads us apart and not our differences, but what unites us, what brings us together, what makes us whole, what makes us one. From the very beginning, when the Gra avoided the Alter Rebbe because he knew about his Kedusha, to the Alter Rebbe defending the dignity of the Gra when he passed away, to a Talmud of the Gra saving the Alter Rebbe when he was running from the Russians, to a Talmud of the Gra knowing Tanya Baal Peh. And it continued for the generations to come. Rav Kook was a Talmud of Volozhin. He learned in Volozhin. But his mother came from a Hasidic background, from a Hasidic home, from the home of the Talmidim of the Tzemach Tzedek. And in fact, Rav Kook's life was infused with the Torah of the Beis Medrash of Volozhin and with the warmth of the home of his mother. And his mother and father would argue over Rav Kook. And his father's desire, which Rav Zevin, who himself grew up a Chabad Chassid and then learned in the Litvish yeshivas, later testified that all week Rav Kook was a Rav. Come Shabbos, Rav Kook became a Rebbe. All week long he was a Talmud of Volozhin, and Shabbos particularly at Shalashudas, he became a Rebbe, fearing his own tish. And we don't have the time. Rabbi Yoni already came to sit down next to me. A very subtle hint. Well done, Yoni. But I would read to you from Rav Zevin, who Rav Zevin describes. He said about Rav Kook, the only thing missing in this genuine Hasidic setting was a Chabad discourse, but suddenly the whole became silent. Rav Kook sat and spoke. Every concept and work soaked into my limbs, intellect and emotion joined. The thoughts were original, but they were spiced with Chabad concepts and what he spoke about. Rav Kook was this hybrid, was this union. Rav Soloveitchik, as we said, brisk, Volozhin, but Chasidus, Chaslovich, and Tanya Bapel, Likutei Torah to the Bachram of Rabbi Yitzchak Ochanan. Rav Hutner came from Warsaw. Rav Hutner came from the Beis Medrash of Ger, of Kotsk, and went to learn in Slobodka. Rav Kook, whose yurtzeit, Rav Hutner, correct, whose yurtzeit was today, Chav Kislev. The Heiliger Rav Hutner, Chaim Berlin, a Litvish yeshiva run by Rav Hutner, a Hasidic Rebbe, the Pachad Yitzchak of Ger and of Kotsk. And so while those who want to divide will point to the parts of history in which there was conflict, and those who want to divide today will continue to focus on the differences, Chevra, I think the light of the Balatanya, the light of Chasidus of the Baal Shem, I think the goal of Farbrengen together on Yutas Kislev is not to focus on the differences, but what unites us, what brings us together. The need to emphasize both the Nigla and the Nister. And much of what I shared, I spoke earlier today with, everyone remembers, Rav Ruvain Bashnak, early leader in our Shtibel Minyan, who shared some of these ideas. Another friend of David Weinberg wrote online for Yutas Kislev. He said the Baal Shem wasn't saying we shouldn't know Shas cold. He was just suggesting we should also know it warm. He wasn't suggesting that we shouldn't know Shas cold. Being a chassid doesn't mean that we neglect or ignore or dismiss Toras HaNigla, Shas, Halacha, Poskim. But it means that we don't only know it cold, we also know it warm. We also know it together in a way that inspires, that transforms. There's much more to be said, but there are many more speakers. But the Balatanya, before he was liberated from that prison, the famous conversation he had with that prison guard inspires me almost every day since I learned it and read it. When the guard challenged him about Ayeka, the Ribono Shel Olam asked Adam, where are you? A question that undoubtedly he knew. He's the omnipotent, infinite God. He knows everything. If ways can know where you are, then certainly Alachas Kama V'Kama, Lahavdil, the Ribono Shel Olam knows the exact coordinates of all of us at all times. What do you mean, Ayeka, where are you? Yet the Rebbe understood and he challenged every one of us that Ayeka is not a geographical question, where are you? It's an existential one. Who are you and where are you and what difference are you making in this world? Are we living with an awareness and a presence? Are we submitting and surrendering to Him? Is all that we do elevated with Kedusha? Because there is no Rishus, there is no third category. Everything is either feeding the holy or the Sitra Achra, the other side. So Ayeka, where are we on that question of how we lead our lives, and do we have an awareness of Him, and do we understand our mission and our charge and the difference we're meant to make? Do we focus on what unites, or do we emphasize what differentiates? Do we feel together that we beat with one heart, or do we see people who are other opponents on the other side? Ayeka. And as we honor this Rosh Hashanah of Chasidus, of not only his being free, but the birth of the spread of this light in this world, may we all answer that question. May we accelerate the spreading of that light. May we feel united and together by that Achdus which was present even from the very beginning, just beneath the surface. I think there's a message that this Talmud of the Gra hid the Balatanya. It means that within the home of the Gra was hidden the energy of the Balatanya all along. Even when on the surface someone is of a Talmud that denies, but hidden within, buried, the Pneumius within, hidden. The Ribono Shel Olam orchestrated things that a Talmud of the Gra would have to hide, that within the Pneumius would be the Balatanya himself. What a powerful image and what a powerful message. And if we can all answer that call, then Amir Hashem, we could Farbrengen Yerushalayim with Mashiach Tzidkeinu b'mehera v'yameinu.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Goldberg. My parents are actually sitting right to your left. Big fans of your Tuesday morning Parsha share here. This evening is actually partially sponsored by my parents. And loving memory of my grandparents, Alvin and Irma Heller. Thank you so much. Some know him as Bob Dylan's rabbi. Other people know him as Benny Friedman's father. But I think most people know him as YouTube's most popular rabbi. Sorry. For now. For now. The truth is, when I was 16 years old, I was a counselor in Gan Yisrael, New York, in Parksville, upstate New York. The head counselor came over to me and he gave me my bunk list, who's in the bunk. And there was a name, Zalman Friedman, on the list. Zalman, this young kid of 7 years old, comes in, he starts unpacking his bag. I ask him where he's from. He says, I'm from Minnesota. Suddenly I say, wait a second, your father is Rabbi Manis Friedman? Very, cautiously said, yes. I was so excited, I ran down to the payphone, because we didn't have cell phones in those days, and I called my mother in Pittsburgh. I said, Ma, you'll never believe who's in my bunk. Rabbi Manis Friedman, I heard, was a legend, a rock star, especially in my home, the Shabbatons. Little did I know that many years later, he would become my uncle through marriage, and I want to welcome my wife, Rivki, tonight. And little did I know also that I'd have the honor and privilege for 10 years to travel with the Rabbi Manis Friedman across the globe, trips to Israel a number of times, teaching hipsters in Williamsburg in coffee shops about Chassidus, Chabad Chassidus, the Tanya, to yeshivas Gush Etzion in Israel. We literally traveled many places, many communities together to basically teach the world what does it mean, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, how to serve God with joy, because honestly it's not easy. And the whole Tanya is based on the pasuk of Ki karei ve'lecha hadavar moed b'ficha v'vavcha la'asoisoi. It's so easy and natural for you to serve God, as it says in the Torah. Is it? So today, before the lecture, I, together with Rabbi Friedman, we're sitting in Carmela's restaurant, and he told me a great quote. Mark Twain once said, the two most important days of your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. If there's one person, a mashpia, a mentor, a rabbi, who has answered that question for me, and I think millions of views on YouTube can testify for that. The numbers don't lie. People world over email me, obviously comment to the rabbi. He's given them a new perspective, a new understanding of God, of course, based on the teachings of Chassidus. It is truly my honor and my privilege to call up Rabbi Manis Friedman, a father of 14 children, many of which are shluchim across the world, from Salem, Oregon, to Cleveland, Ohio, to Calabasas, to Simcha Cruz, California, and so many other places, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'm from. He says the story, he was in Minnesota checking out from the supermarket, and the cashier saw some of the kids and said, Rabbi, how many children do you have? And he said, 14. And the cashier said, wow, 4 teenagers, that must be rough. He said 14, but I'll leave the jokes. Everyone knows Rabbi Friedman has an incredible sense of humor. Before I call up Rabbi Friedman, I want to give a sincere and honest thank you to a new member who moved just down recently to Boca Raton from Woodmere, who's become a close friend of mine. He's actually still currently till January 1st, the fire chief in the Woodmere Fire Department. Now he lives here, and he's a member of the Shtibel Minyan. Adam Slotnick sitting over there. Welcome him and his wife Nechama to the community. I went recently to his house, and he showed me his fire helmet, his second one, literally burned and charred, and Mesiras Nefesh, going out on a nightly basis, saving lives for obviously mostly from people who live in Woodmere and Lawrence and Cedarhurst. So thank you, Adam, for your encouragement when this Farbrengen was just an idea. So without further ado, I'm going to call upon Rabbi Friedman. Anyone who's parked possibly in the spots by the mikveh, right out in front, there are the 3 spots, I think, right by the mikveh, double check if you're in those spots. Without further ado, my very own uncle, Rabbi Manis Friedman.
The day of Yutes Kislev is known as the Chag HaChagim, the festival of festivals, the holiday of holidays. What it means is that since Yutes Kislev, we have a whole new appreciation of all the holidays that we've been celebrating for thousands of years. So it brings the holiday, or it puts the holiday into the holiday. It is also described as the day in which the light and warmth, life of our souls were given to us. Eir v'chayes nafshenu niten lanu. Yutes Kislev gave us the great double blessing of light and life. It's just very interesting that Chassidus says that light is higher than life. Strange, a little surprising. And the proof of it is an artist can create a painting that is alive. The artist can produce life on canvas, but he can't produce light. So if the artist paints a picture of a sun, turn off the light in the room, there's no light. You can't reproduce light, but you can reproduce life. So light is higher than life. But let's try a little bit to understand what these two things are. What is the light of the neshama, and what is the life of our neshama? When the Alter Rebbe asked, and based the whole Tanya on this question, Torah says it is very natural for every Jew to love God. But we don't see it. In our experience, the exact opposite. Loving self is perfectly natural. Loving God is an awesome job. You have to learn, you have to work on yourself, you have to refine yourself, you have to give up a little bit of the physical comforts and indulgences and so on. It's a huge job. And even after years of trying, I don't know anyone, from the biggest chassid to the biggest scholar, I don't know anyone who could say with a straight face, I love God. Even after all the efforts. So the Rebbe says, how do we explain this? How do we understand this? If a student were to ask that question in yeshiva, in many yeshivas, he would be expelled. He would be thrown out. So for a moment, let's talk about Pesach and see what this holiday did to the holiday of Pesach. Just one example. We know that there are 4 sons with their 4 questions. And they're called, in Hebrew, they are called kashias. Or in Yiddish, tatich vel badifregen 4 kashias. A kasha is one type of question. We don't have an equivalent in English to the different kinds of questions. But in Hebrew, there are distinctions. There are kashas and there are shailas. You can ask a kasha, you can ask a shaila. A kasha usually refers to a scholarly conundrum. In one place, the Gemara says that it's kosher, in another place it says it's not. In one place it says you're allowed to do this on Shabbos, in another place it says you're not allowed to do kasha. If you don't learn, you don't have kasha. A shaila, on the other hand, is simply a request for information. You come to the rabbi and you say, Rabbi, this food item, can I eat it or not? It's not a kasha, it's a shaila. Yes or no? When you look at the 4 questions, are they kashas or are they shailas? For example, the simple son. You remember the simple son's question? Ma zois. What is this? Is that a kasha? Is that a scholarly question? Is that an intellectual, learned conundrum? He's asking, what's going on? The wicked son. What's the wicked son's question? What do we have to do all this? What are you working so hard? Is that a learned question? That the question of a scholar? No, it's more of a shaila than a kasha. And even the wise son, how wise is he? His question is, there are 3 kinds of mitzvahs. Why? It's not a kasha. It's a shaila. And the proof of it all is the 4th son. How is the 4th son described? She'ena yodea lish'ol. He doesn't have a shaila. What are we supposed to do with the son who doesn't have a shaila, doesn't have a question? Open up. Open up the conversation. Lead him to ask a question. Now, if the question in question is a learned question, why do you have to create a kasha for him? If you don't have a kasha, that's fine. You have to create a kasha. But a shaila, if the son does not ask a shaila, you're concerned and you have to help him out and get him to ask a shaila. Now, the real difference between a kasha and a shaila is that a kasha is not personal. It's objective. There's an obvious contradiction here, or a logical contradiction. Nothing personal. And that's why if the teacher in school doesn't answer your kasha, no harm done. If he says, let's talk about it next week, okay. If he says, I don't know, no harm done. In fact, in many places in the Gemara, there's a question, and the answer will be coming with Mashiach. When Mashiach comes and Eliyahu accompanies him or introduces him, we'll ask Eliyahu, and he will answer all the questions. So a student in the times of the Gemara was told, wait 2,000 years, you'll have your answer. Fine. No harm done. But a shaila is a personal question. A shaila describes where the student is. That's personal. And that's why Chacham mahu oimer. From what he says, you can tell who he is. With each of the sons, the question that they ask reveals who that child is. If you don't answer that question, you're not rejecting the question, you're rejecting the student. And then there's trouble. He's hurt, he's turned off. Obviously, it's not important enough to answer his question. He's not important enough, and now you've got a rebellion. Unfortunately, for many, many years, if a student asked a kasha, the teacher would get very excited. They would spend the entire day on it. They would do research, and they would be so proud of the student with his good kasha. But if a student asked a shaila, they would throw him out of class. Because he's doubting, he's cynical, he's questioning, can't tolerate that. But look at what the Haggadah is saying. I mean, picture the scene. You change the whole house because Pesach is coming. For weeks, you're rubbing and scrubbing and washing and preparing, and you take out the new set of dishes, and it's all new foods, and you're sitting by a Seder table. This doesn't happen the rest of the year. So the Chacham, the wise son, says, what are all these different mitzvahs here? Some of them make sense, some of them don't make sense. What's going on? The wicked son says, why do we bother? This is too much work. What's it worth? The simple son says, what's going on? What happened to the house? And the one who doesn't ask has no reaction. And the parents are worried. No reaction? The house is turned upside down, everything is different, and you have no reaction? We're worried. So, at psachloi, you have to get him involved, engage him so that he has some kind of a response. In fact, according to Chabad educational theory, you, the teacher, ask the question. Don't even wait for the student. And the question is a shaila, not a kasha. Like, for example, the Torah says it is very natural for you to serve God with love, and it's not. For this, a student could get thrown out of yeshiva. How dare you question? How is it that the Alter Rebbe asked such a question? If the Torah says it is natural, and you believe that the Torah is the Word of God, then it is. Torah says natural, it's natural. What are you doubting? What are you asking? Isn't that a lack of faith? So in many schools, for such a question, you get thrown out. So you can imagine the chaos and the confusion that came just from that question. How does a rabbi, a scholar, a teacher raise such a question? Is that a lack of faith? On the contrary, since the Torah says that it is natural for every Jew to love God, therefore it is true. So the question is, knowing that it's true, how come we don't see it? It's not questioning the truth of the statement. It's questioning why a truth would not appear, show up in everyday life. So it's either because we don't know what a Jew is, we're not in touch with the Jew in ourselves, or we got the wrong God. It's one of the two. Why? Because what the Torah says is true. And if it's true, you got to know it, you got to see it, you got to feel it, you got to experience it. It's not truth in heaven. You're talking about Jews on earth. So how can it be that this truth goes unnoticed? So it's not a lack of faith. On the contrary, here's the light that Chabad Tanya brought to the world. Light means the ability to see clearly, the clarity. Clarity means seeing the truth of a statement. And just very briefly, different people measure truth with different tools. An intellectual, for example, doesn't have to be a genius. An intellectual is someone to whom logic is true. If it's logical, it's true. Emotions, they're cute, but it's not true. For an emotional person, a sensitive person, intellect, okay, good idea, sounds right, but it doesn't ring with truth. But if it touches the heart, if it inspires a feeling, whoa, now it's true, that gives it the reality. So what makes something real and true to you? Of course, there's also the believer. If I'm told it's true and I'm supposed to believe it, that's true. Logic doesn't convince me, emotions doesn't convince me, but if it's a matter of faith, okay, it's true. You may have heard this story. I'm sitting in an airport, and this guy comes over, sits down, and launches into a sermon. He's a missionary. He had some free time before his flight. So he sits down, and he gives me a little sermon about how the Bible is the Word of God. And every word in the Bible is true. You can't disprove it. No science can ever argue with it because it's the Word of God, and every word in the Bible is true. He went on like for 15 minutes. Then he remembers his manners, and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, what is your relationship with the Bible?" I should have said, "I pronounce it Bible." He says, "What is your relationship?" So I said, "I'm a Kohen. So Aaron is my grandfather, which means Moses is my uncle, and Miriam is my aunt." His mouth fell open. He didn't know what to say. He mumbled under his breath and he walked away. The question is, he just finished telling me how every word in the Bible is true. Why was he so shocked? He knows that there's an Aaron. He knows that it's the brother of Moses. He knows that Miriam is the sister. What's so shocked? You see, you can believe something because it's a belief, but it's not true. It doesn't make it true. So yes, it is religiously true because every word in the Bible is true. You mean he has a grandson? Whoa, not that true. So where does truth come in? When does something become true? To a very physical person, if I can't touch it, it's not true. If I can touch it, if I can taste it, okay, now it's true. And you can say all the theories you want, and you can get all emotional, but if it doesn't taste good, it's not true. So different people have a different way of measuring truth. Chabad is not just a theory, a philosophy. It's the approach to truth, and that's light. When you see light, when things are clear, they're true. The life, that's the enthusiasm of your response. So the light illuminates the mind, makes things clearly true, and the heart is inspired to respond. So my first point for tonight is we have to ask the questions, until it becomes real and true. It's not enough to just have an answer. Is it true? So the Alter Rebbe starts off by saying, the Torah says it's true. How do you know it's true? What makes it true and real for you? Because once it becomes real, that's a whole different thing. Then it can affect the heart in a healthy way, and you become inspired in a healthy way, and then you serve God in a healthy way. So we should ask the questions. And that's why as a teenager, when I started learning Chassidus with Rabbi Yoel, I was shocked. Because he seemed to be asking questions that were heretical. But they were so illuminating. So he didn't wait for us to ask the question. He asked the question. Like, for example, we're reading a maimer, a text, and it's all very exciting, and you can do a mitzvah, and the mitzvah connects you to the highest worlds, and it brings the light of God down into the... And Rabbi Yoel says, so why would you care? So, ooh, you're allowed to say that? Like, okay, fine, I don't care. It's all very nice, but, class over, can I go now? So Rabbi Yoel would anticipate those kinds of responses and would ask the question for us. That means it's real. Not afraid to ask the question. On the contrary, if you don't ask the question, you're skimming. You're not getting to the truth of Torah. So in the Gemara, we find an interesting thing. Abaye and Rava, two of the greatest scholars in the Talmud, were little boys in cheder, in school. And the teacher, the Gemara records this story. The teacher asked them, when you say the benching after eating, who are you praising? They said, God. And the teacher said, where is he? You're allowed to ask that. The teacher asked it. So we got to really ask the right questions. Respond. God says you should love me with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Can I go now? All right, fine. Can I go now? So just imagine you have 4 sons, and you say to them, you have to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. What would your wise son say? Heart, soul, might. What is that? Good question. Eidos, chukim, mishpatim. Why? Right? What would the wicked son say? I should love him. Let him love me. Which is a good opportunity. It's an opening. He's responding. He's reacting. He's engaging. What would the simple son say to that statement? Following his kind of question in the Haggadah, he would say, what's love? What's that? That's the best question of all. And then there's a son sitting there and he has no response. You worried? Should be. So what do? You ask the question. You ask the question. How do you love God? Good question. And the Tanya answers the question. What happens now? You gonna sing?
We're going to sing a little and we're going to eat a little bit. So if everyone during this little sort of break will hear some Nigunim. Thank you very much, Rabbi Friedman. You can get some food at the buffet in the back. Schnitzel, prime rib, cantor ayer label, sing a few nigunim, and then Rabbi Friedman will continue. And the topic is, why were the Alter Rebbe's teachings so controversial? Continuing the theme of the night, chaos and controversy. Chaim.
Ladies and gentlemen, just a quick announcement again. If you're parked in the spots that say they're saved for the mikvah, you're making people very uncomfortable. If you could move your car, it'd be a great mitzvah. Thank you.
Those locations for the mikvah spots are behind the building adjacent to the ladies' mikvah. So it's very important if you're there, please move those 3 or 4 cars that are parked there. We're not stopping. It's not over. We have a lot of food. We want to make sure people eat. We're going to start to do some nigunim and sing and continue for bringing. Night is young. Rabbi Goldberg is going to do the behind the beam and then come back and sit and for bring. Rabbi Blumenthal, don't go nowhere. All right, good.
a toif